All right, we're going to talk a little bit more about zeros of a function. All right, and I just want to mention, some of you may not have this sheet. Okay, if you don't have this, that's fine. You can just write this on the back of the one-sided sheet you had from class, right? Or you can be doing this on a separate sheet of paper, right? There's no graphs on this one, so this one should be really easy to write down. Okay, so if we have this function, f of x is equal to negative 2x plus 6, we're going to talk about how to find the zeros of that function. Right? Before we get there, let's actually go back to a problem that we kind of already know about. All right, so let's look at number 3. All right, so if f of x is equal to negative 2x plus 6, right, we know that, and we want to find, let's go, the question says, for what values of x is f of x equal to 12? Another way of saying that, remember, is we want to find the input values, right? We want to find the input values that are going to give us an output value of 12. Okay, so in other words, we're trying to figure out what inputs are going to make this output equal 12. Right? And that's really the key. Right? Remember, what this is saying is that if you know your input, well, then the output is going to be negative 2 times your input plus 6. Right? So in other words, this is going to be your output. Right? Whatever your input is, right, you multiply that by negative 2 and add 6 to it, and then whatever you get from that, that's your output. Right? And this question is saying, what input values is going to give us an output of 12? Right? So in other words, when is this output going to be equal to 12? Right? Or in other words, we can solve this equation. Negative 2x plus 6 is equal to 12. Right? When will this output be the same as this, 12? Okay? And this is pretty easy to solve. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's see, it's subtract 6 from both sides. We end up with negative 2x is equal to 6. And then we can divide both sides by 2. And we get the input value, or I'm sorry, let's divide by negative 2. And we get x equals negative 3. Right? So what does that mean? Right? This is our answer. But what does that mean? That means that negative 3 is the input value that gives us an output of 12. In other words, f of negative 3 would be positive 12. Okay, so here's your answer. All right, so let's think about how that's related to question 4. Right, question 4 says, find the zeros of our function, f of x. Right, remember what a zero is. The zeros are the inputs that give us an output of 0. In other words, the zeros are the x values. Let me rewrite this question. We could rewrite this as saying, find the x values or input values that give us an output of 0. In other words, we want to find the inputs such that f of x is equal to 0. Right? What inputs will give us an output of 0? I'd like you to pause and try to solve this. Let's see if you did it. Okay? So we're saying that 0 is our output, right? And remember our definition of our function? It said the output would always be negative 2x plus 6. So we're basically trying to see when would the output, negative 2x plus 6, be equal to 0. And we would solve this. So I would subtract 6 from both sides. We get negative 2x equals negative 6. Divide by negative 2, and we get an x value of positive 3. Okay? So what does this mean? This is a zero of the function. That means that 3 is an input that gives us an output of 0. Or another way to say that is that f of 3 would be equal to 0. All right, let's do 2 more. We've got a different function here. G of x equals x squared minus 9. Right? For what values of x is g of x equal to 16? Okay, I'm going to do this one with you. All right, so in other words, this is saying, when will this output be equal to 16? right? What input values give us an output of 16? Right? So we can try to figure out when will x squared minus 9 be equal to 16. All right? So let's solve this. Well, I would add 9 to both sides. And then we get x squared is equal to 25. All right, well, how would we deal with this? Right? Well, we would take the square root of both sides. So take the square root of x squared and the square root of 25. Let's see, the square root of 25 is 5. What's the square root of x squared? Hopefully you remember that is the absolute value of x. So we end up with this. The absolute value of x is 5. What are the solutions of this? Well, there are two. X could either be equal to negative 5 or x could be equal to 5. Okay, so let's go back to our question. For what values of x is g of x equal to 16? Well, there are two. The two x values that give us an output of 16 are negative 5 and also positive 5. Right? So in other words, g of negative 5 should be 16, and also g of positive 5 should be equal to 16. Right? And you can check that if you don't believe me. If I plug in negative 5 here, negative 5 squared would be 25. 25 minus 9 is an output, a value of 16. Same thing happens if I input 5. If 5 is my input, 5 squared is 25 minus 9 gives me an output of 16. So there are two input values that have an output value of 16. All right, I want you to do number 6 on your own. Find the zeros of our function. Find the input values that give us output of 0. Please pause and do that. All right, let's check to see if you got it. So we're trying to find the input values such that g of x would be equal to 0. That's what it means to find the zeros. Right? So we want to see when will x squared minus 9 be equal to 0. Right? Well, I can add 9 to both sides. We get x squared is equal to 9. And then square root both sides. The absolute value of x is what we get on the left. And then we get square root of 9 is 3. Right? And so we get two x values. X could either be equal to negative 3 or x could be equal to positive 3. Right? So those are the zeros of our function. Right? Negative 3 and 3. Those are the two values that give us an output of 0.